Hello, it's noon on Wednesday, the 17th of June. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'm Mark Broome. We begin today with an update on the outbreak of Middle East respiratory syndrome here in Korea. And although it's not a big increase, we are seeing more MERS patients every day, and today is no exception. The good news is that all new cases originated in hospitals. For more, we connect with our Han-Dan at the news center. Dan, fill us in.
Mark, we've been waking up to new MERS cases every day for the last 4 weeks, and people are just keeping their fingers crossed for this ordeal to be over soon. But it's too early to tell if the disease will further spread or subside, as 8 more cases were confirmed overnight. As of Wednesday, June 17th, Korea has seen a total of 161 MERS patients and 20 deaths, with 1 death reported overnight. There are more than 6,500 in quarantine, while more than 3,950 have been released from quarantine. The patient who passed away had pre-existing ailments. Now, Mark, you'll notice how the number of people in quarantine has increased drastically overnight. Some 922 people were put into quarantine, more than 650 at home and 250 in medical facilities. About 440 were released from quarantine overnight. All the infected patients, but 18, are in stable condition. Mark?
And Dan, I hear that 5 of the 8 new cases we heard about today are assumed to have contracted the virus at Samsung Medical Center in Seoul.
Yes, Mark, health authorities say the 5 are most likely to have been infected from patient 14, the super spreader, at Samsung Medical Center between the 26th and the 29th of May. This is ringing new alarm bells for officials and experts, as the incubation period for all possible patients who may have been infected from the super spreader is long over. It's been more than 20 days since the super spreader last stayed at Samsung Hospital. Now, if the new cases are confirmed to have been passed on by the super spreader, then nearly half of the total MERS cases in Korea have originated at Samsung Hospital from 1 single patient. The other 3 confirmed with the virus were at Hallym University Dongtan Hospital in Gyeonggi-do Province, Good Morning Hospital in Pyeongtaek, also in Gyeonggi-do Province, and Gyeonghee University Hospital at Gangdong. That's all I have for now. Back to you.
Now, as the MERS outbreak becomes protracted with more and more people at home in quarantine, it's getting difficult for health authorities to keep track of everyone. And not everyone is staying put. Other people, however, are choosing to stay home in an effort to avoid infection. For more, Shin Se-min reports.
The extended MERS outbreak is keeping people at home, but not everyone is staying there. Just yesterday, a man who was advised to quarantine himself at home after he started showing symptoms of infection left his home and boarded a fishing boat in Incheon for a local tour. After authorities located the 32-year-old, known only by his surname Kim, they called the boat back to port and transferred Kim to a local health center for monitoring. The 15 other people on the boat have not yet shown any symptoms of infection and have not been quarantined. Health authorities have instructed people in home quarantine to stay at home for 2 full weeks and minimize contact with other individuals. But it's getting more difficult for them to keep track of everyone and ensure that they aren't breaking quarantine. Already 4 other people under home quarantine have left their residences. Under the current law, people who break home quarantine will be fined 3 million won, or over $2,600. Some people, however, would prefer to stay put. Just this past Sunday, the number of people using public transportation dropped nearly 22% from 2 weeks ago when concerns about MERS began to develop. It's expected that the drop in usage will push down the transportation authorities' income by more than $1.2 million. Worried members of the public aren't going near hospitals either, even if they need drugs. Rather, a jump in sales of non-prescription drugs at convenience stores show that more people have been purchasing basic medicines there. With the MERS virus still spreading, it is unclear when the concerns will subside and the public will feel confident about going through their daily routines. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, the MERS scare is also affecting the job market here in Korea, especially the retail, food and hotel sectors, which had been adding jobs until the outbreak began. Statistics Korea says these industries added an average of 138,000 new jobs each month from January to May this year, compared to the same time last year. However, the MERS outbreak has weakened consumer sentiment and people are spending less time outside. According to the Korea Food Service Industry Research Institute, restaurants saw an over 38% decrease in sales last week compared to 2 weeks ago. Department store sales also dropped more than 16% in the first week of June compared to last year. Although job numbers have yet to be collected, officials say part-time employment in those sectors will likely decrease in line with weak sales. Now, despite the MERS outbreak's negative effect on the Korean economy, recent analysis has found that Korea is a country best equipped to weather economic crises. According to the POSCO Research Institute, which analysed the vulnerability of 30 emerging economies, Korea is not subject to any of the 6 factors that signal weakness. The factors include external debt to GDP ratio, inflation rate, and economic growth rate. Most emerging economies on the list, including Indonesia, India, Russia and Poland, had at least one weakness. Analysts say most Asian nations, including Korea, are fairly strong when it comes to their foreign exchange positions and economic fundamentals. And according to the latest edition of the Britain-based Economist, Korea was ranked second after Norway as having the most wriggle room to economic shocks. Korea's rival parties have agreed to cast votes about Prime Minister nominee Hwang Kyo-ahn's confirmation at the full assembly on Thursday morning. The decision came after last-minute negotiations between the deputy floor leaders of Korea's 2 rival parties this morning. The agreement was made possible as main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy, that party which objects to the nominee because of a string of unresolved allegations against him, opened a room of negotiations this morning, saying that the party would participate in the vote if the ruling party agrees to set up a special committee on improving the hearing process to prevent future cases like Hwang's. The ruling Saenuri party was aiming to complete the process with a vote by the full assembly today, ahead of a 4-day interpellation session that starts on Thursday. Staying in politics, the leader of the main opposition party is getting ready to release the name of his choice for the post of Secretary General as the party gears up for next year's general election. Party chair Moon Jae-in is reportedly thinking of seating Choi Jae-sung, a member of a group loyal to the late former president Roh Moo-hyun. But Moon is already receiving opposition from a non-pro-no faction that says by appointing chair, he would be reigniting an internal factional feud within the party. The Secretary General is responsible for screening party candidates for electoral districts and formulating strategies for leading the party to victory in major elections. Now, over in Washington, South Korea's foreign minister held talks on Tuesday with U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken. The 2 diplomats discussed a wide range of issues, with North Korea topping their agenda. Hwang Sang-hee reports.
South Korea and the United States have agreed to ramp up the pressure on North Korea in an effort to get the regime to denuclearize. The vow came after South Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se and U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken met for talks on Tuesday in Washington. Blinken is filling in for Secretary of State John Kerry, who is recovering from a leg injury after a cycling accident. Referring to the 6-party denuclearization talks, Seoul's foreign ministry said South Korea and the U.S. will respond strongly to any North Korean provocations or threats, while strengthening cooperation with the other members of the talks for resuming meaningful dialogue. The multilateral dialogue involving the 2 Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan and Russia has been stalled for more than 6 years. Regarding President Park Geun-hye's visit to Washington, the 2 sides agreed to work together to reschedule her trip to the earliest possible date. The South Korean leader postponed her trip last week to cope with the outbreak of Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS, at home. The South Korean minister also briefed Blinken on the efforts Korea is making to improve ties with Japan ahead of the 50th anniversary of the normalization of their relations next week. Yoon is expected to visit Tokyo next Monday to attend the celebrations at the Korean embassy in Japan and meet with his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida. The U.S. official said he looked forward to more cooperation between the three countries. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
North Korea has repatriated 2 South Koreans who were detained in the north for about a month. The 2, known to be a couple in their 50s, were returned through the Chus village of Panmunjom this morning. The South Korean government is planning to check their health and investigate why they crossed the China-North Korea border back in May. Pyongyang, though, is still holding 4 other South Koreans captive. They include Kim Jong-uk, a missionary who was arrested by the regime in 2013, and Ju Won-moon, who was voluntarily and illegally entered North Korea 2 months ago. Seoul tried to send a letter to Pyongyang last Friday, urging the regime to release the 4 detainees immediately, but the North Koreans refused to accept it. South Korea has urged Japan to look into unresolved issues before pushing ahead with the registration of what Tokyo sees as historically important sites on the UNESCO World Heritage List. After conducting independent research, a committee under Korea's Prime Minister's office said Wednesday that more than 1,500 Koreans were coerced to work by 5 Japanese companies during Japan's colonial rule of Korea. Japan is pressing for Hashima, once a coal mining hub, and 22 other landmarks of Japan's industrialization to be certified by UNESCO. The use of slave labor was even worse during World War II, with an estimated 60,000 Koreans forced to work in unbearable conditions. The committee also urged Tokyo to return to Korea the remains of forced laborers who died at those sites. US President Barack Obama has sent a civil nuclear energy cooperation agreement with Korea to US Congress for approval. If it passes, as it is expected to do, South Korea will be allowed to begin research into recycling spent nuclear fuel, as well as producing low-grade uranium, providing it has Washington's permission. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
A day after Korea and the U.S. signed the Civil Nuclear Energy Cooperation Agreement, U.S. President Barack Obama sent the agreement to Congress for approval on Tuesday, saying that the Asian ally has a strong track record on non-proliferation. The agreement is a revision to their 1974 Nuclear Cooperation Pact, which lays out Korea's responsibilities in exchange for technical support and cooperation from Washington. The agreement was made after more than 4 years of negotiations that focused on reconciling Seoul's demand for the right to reprocess spent nuclear fuel and enriched uranium with Washington's concerns about proliferation. The new deal still bans Korea from reprocessing and enrichment, but allows the country to begin research into a technology for recycling spent nuclear fuel, known as pyroprocessing, and developing low-grade enriched uranium with the U.S.'s consent. Obama wrote in a letter to Congress that the agreement meets all the criteria for non-proliferation established in Section 123 of the U.S. Atomic Energy Act and provides a comprehensive framework for peaceful nuclear cooperation with the ROK based on a mutual commitment to non-proliferation. Obama emphasized that Korea has a strong track record on non-proliferation and that it constantly reiterated its commitment to non-proliferation. Congress has 90 congressional days to review the agreement, which could extend to 6 months. The pact will pass if there's no opposition during that time, and experts believe it will. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
There are fears a new Cold War could be creeping up between Russia and the West. Russian President Vladimir Putin says his country is beefing up its nuclear arsenal to counter U.S. plans to station tanks and heavy weapons near Russia's western border. Son Jung-in has more.
Speaking at an arms fair just outside of Moscow on Tuesday, Putin said Russia would be adding dozens of new intercontinental ballistic missiles to its nuclear arsenal this year in an effort to modernize its armament program.
More than 40 new ICBMs able to overcome even the most technically advanced anti-missile defense systems will be added to the makeup of our nuclear arsenal this year.
Putin's announcement comes after reports the U.S. is pondering the deployment of tanks, fighting vehicles, and other heavy weaponry for as many as 5,000 American troops in several Baltic and Eastern European countries close to Russia's border. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg was quick to denounce Russia's move, saying such rhetoric is why the Western alliance needs to bolster preparedness to defend its member states.
This nuclear saber rattling of Russia is unjustified, it's destabilizing, and it's dangerous.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry also expressed his concern as the standoff between the world's two largest nuclear powers heats up over the crisis in Ukraine. With no indications pro-Russian separatist forces will back down from the region anytime soon, many fear relations will plunge even further. 손정인, 아리랑 뉴스.
Well, those are the stories we're following at this hour. Do enjoy the rest of your Wednesday wherever you're watching us, and stay tuned to Arirang TV. Goodbye.